Hello, my friends. The events which are happening are, I would say, even decisive for the war in Ukraine and for the security of Europe and maybe for entire world. I mean those negotiations which are happening in Abu Dhabi, and according to the information from the legacy media sources like Financial Times, the United States of America continue to press Ukraine for capitulation, for withdrawal of the forces from Donbas region completely. In today's video I want to speak about real perspectives and whether the peace is achievable, or at least the ceasefire, because for the first time Ukrainian side even says that we are at the final stage to sign some certain agreement with the United States of America based on the proposal of those 20 points peace plan that was corrected by European partners and Ukraine and the United States of America. Well, first of all, about this position of the United States to force Ukraine to withdraw its army from the most fortified area of Donbas. Yes, those are 20% of the remaining territory of Donetsk Oblast, and Russia says that it's the key factor for them to sign any sort of the peace agreement, as they say, long-term with Ukraine. Those guys, as Davydov and Kushner, they really believe in what Russians are saying and promising. Moreover, Davydov personally managed to convince Donald Trump that pressing Ukraine is a good strategy for achieving peace and obtaining the Nobel Prize. Personally, for Donald Trump, I guess it's the main motivation still for Donald Trump to resolve this war. He stated about it many of the times, and the leaked conversation between Macron and Donald Trump, and then Macron stated that Zelensky is agree for the ceasefire. It was the last spring. Well, the first comment from Donald Trump was, "Give me the Nobel Peace Prize." It is his personal narcissism, his personal ego. And Donald Trump is just like that. Americans selected that kind of the president. But unfortunately, that president, as we see, influences not just the United States of America, but the entire world's stability, especially Ukraine. Because Ukraine, whether we like it or not, is still very dependent on the United States of America. This transition period to rely just on Europe is yet to come. Still, there is the military intelligence, still there is the Pearl program, especially if we speak about the air defense and PAC-3 missiles that Ukraine uses to shut down Russian ballistics and sometimes even Russian hypersonic missiles. Well, it is only coming from the United States, and having this good relation with Donald Trump personally is, I would say, the obligation of Ukrainian government and President Zelensky personally. That's why sometimes President Zelensky is kind of flattering with Donald Trump, saying good things to him. But I know that inside, Zelensky and many of the European politicians, they're shocked about Donald Trump's behavior, especially when Donald Trump really intimidated a NATO member country, Denmark, by threatening to even using military action, because he said that we are looking to any sort of this scenario to occupy Greenland. In an easy way or hard way, it depends on European Union. Luckily, European partners of the United States, together with Mark Rutte, Secretary of NATO, managed to convince Donald Trump that it's better not to use at least military action in his demand towards Denmark to acquire, as they say, Greenland. So for now, this escalation around Greenland is partially off the table, but for how long? Well, no one is capable to foresee, because Donald Trump is very unpredicted, as his entire White House administration. But there is the question where White House is very well predicted. It's about peace negotiations around Ukraine. The position of Russia is not changing, as well as the position of the White House. Yes, there is the special document about security guarantees for Ukraine. It was partially published. Yes, it's not the official information from the White House, but legacy media, they say about it, that Ukraine obtained all of the points for the really serious security guarantees compared to the Budapest Memorandum. But it is not just about security guarantees for Ukraine. It is called a guarantee and restoration project for Ukraine, and the sum is definitely around $800 billion. It was proposed during the Abu Dhabi meeting for Ukraine, only in case Ukraine withdraws its forces from Donbas region. Well, as for me, it sounds like definitely some sort of the scam scheme, because, first of all, I think that Ukraine should obtain those guarantees for Europeans to deploy their forces to Ukrainian territory. Well, not exactly to the front lines, it is understandable, because our European partners, they always afraid to escalate. Then there is the real threat for them, and then even North Korea deployed their forces to Europe, geographically to Europe, yes, not towards NATO, but that country deployed their forces to fight for Russia. Europeans are still calm about it, but according to this new security deal, the presence of the European forces is not just possible, it is must-have for Ukraine. Well, Russia would never agree on that. They will not sign this kind of the document, because for them, if they somehow attack European forces, it might create the reason to use the Article 5 for the NATO to deploy its forces full scale towards Ukraine. That would make any sort of the assault operations from Russia, any sort of the attempts to take Ukraine, not possible for Putin. So for Putin, the current status is more than enough. Then there are some of the talks ongoing, and he continued to perform his special military operation in Ukraine, gaining small portions of the ground, but at the same time wasting his army. I just wonder if Putin has at least a single advisor who might tell him that with his military action in Ukraine, he basically destroys the Russian economy. So Russia itself, as the federation, that the destiny of Russia in this case is just to collapse imminently in a few years. Well, actually there was the guy, I think his surname was Kozak, and he was involved in those negotiations around Minsk agreements, but he was laid off by Putin few months ago. So he was openly criticizing the special military operation. Maybe that was the main reason for him to resign. The Russian official propaganda say that no, it's not because of that reason, he's just getting older, he wants to retire, but no, I don't believe in that. Kozak was kind of close to Putin, but he didn't support his military action. Well, he's not yet been windowed, but he is totally displaced from the political spectrum of Russia. So now Putin's circle, it's all about the special military operation and its support. For Putin, it's the existential war. It's the existential war for Ukraine, but entire Putin's regime is built around the special military operation. So he cannot stop it just like that, because there could be some of the questions asked. Why Putin had started it? Why we had so many losses? For what reason? So for Russia, actually, it's impossible for this autocracy, dictatorship regime to finish it once and for all, just like that, as the result of some sort of the agreement between Ukraine, White House, and Europe. So sadly, guys, but only war is possible until Ukraine is physically capable to stop Russian army on the front lines. Still, Russia has way more resources. Ukraine, with its drone army, was capable to create this kill zone, and Russians are moving with absolutely enormous losses. It has never been like that. The intensity of the fights during the winter time, it dropped down a little bit, but in general it is still high. It is as high as the last year, and for sure Russia is planning some sort of the breakthrough. And for them, well, it would be fantastic if Ukraine agrees on the withdrawal of the forces from Donbas, for them just to take those territories, the most fortified territories, without any sort of the fight, and later on to go to the open field environment straight to Dnipro or Kharkiv, which they may attack from both of the sides, from the south and from the north. From the north they are doing it, even right now, but unsuccessfully. But I guess that Russians understand that Ukraine will never agree to withdraw the forces from Donbas. That's why those negotiations are just for negotiations. Those Russian demands are just for the Russian demands. And the Russian propaganda media, Russian officials, they all say that it's not just about Donbas. Yeah, they may tell like that to Americans, but in general, Putin is saying about original Russian territories, I guess including the capital city of Kyiv and all of the Zaporizhia Oblast. They want to occupy Kharkiv, Dnipro, and basically for them this project of Ukraine as some sort of the democratic state where human rights are respected, where Ukrainians chose the vector to develop in democratic way. For Russia, it shouldn't be, as the neighboring state. Because if Ukraine is successful, and it will be successful, I'm sure about it, it will show the example to all of those nations in Russia. Russia is just this huge federation where multiple of the people live with different religions, different background, traditions, Tatar people, Chechen people, Buryat people, everyone. And they might see that, oh, there is a country, our neighbor. They decided to develop in a different way. They got rid of the pro-Russian Yanukovych, and they are now like the second Poland or something like that. Their infrastructure is the best. They have great salaries, way bigger than in Russia. And that was the reason for Putin to occupy Crimea, to start attacking Donbas, and finally this full-scale aggression, because he wants Ukraine not to exist as the sovereign state and to be slaved by Russia. Sadly, but the guys in the White House, they don't understand what Russia really wants. Not just the White House, but also some of the leaders of the European countries. They think that with some of the territorial concessions to Russia, some sort of the peace is achievable, and we may return to make business as usual with Russia. But unfortunately or fortunately, it's not possible. Only physical stop of Russia on the front lines or really harm for the Russian economy may stop this war. Well, the ceasefire is actually very profitable for Ukraine because Ukraine has less resources compared to Russia, and still Ukraine has big losses. Yes, less than Russia, but still those are the huge relative to the Ukrainian population. So of course the best variant for Ukraine is just to wait, hold positions without any sort of the fight, just stand by and build more defense lines, reform army, by the time also waiting for the Russian regime to collapse. And later on, Ukraine might return all of the territories with minimum fight or without any sort of the fight. Because the destiny of the Russian regime, it's imminent. Russia will collapse as Russia we know it right now. It will be formatted and probably disintegrated into multiple of the countries. This process is ongoing and was ongoing even before the full-scale war against Ukraine. And Putin, with his military action, he just makes this process way faster for Russia to finally collapse and for its economy to collapse. You know, today I listened to Gerasimov, his official report on the Russian media. This video was shared by the Russian military bloggers themselves, and they are shocked. They are shocked of what Russian general, the main commander, is saying. Gerasimov said that Russia encircled thousands and thousands of the troops in Kupiansk, that Kupiansk is under the Russian control, operative control, and that the Russian army has entered the station of the Kupiansk Vuzlavy, then de facto Russia is very far away from that. The real picture is that the Ukrainian army is storming the remains of the Russian forces in Kupiansk, that they are cut from the supplies, they were abandoned by the Russian command. And at the same time, Russian generals are saying open lies, which makes even the Russian Z channels to go crazy about that stuff, because they see all of those published videos from the front lines, from Kupiansk itself, that Ukraine is winning that direction. Russia is in a deep shed in Kupiansk, but still Russian officials, generals, Gerasimov himself, they're lying about it. They're lying about it not just to Putin, but to every Russian, that the Russian army is winning. It tells about the deep crisis inside the Russian army military command and within this rotted down Russian system. It means that Russia is not fulfilling its goal of the special military operation. It also means that to occupy Donbas entirely, Russia will have to spend several years, maybe 2, maybe 3, because again, it's the most fortified zone. But our partners in the West, especially in the White House, they are sure that it's all about this Donbas. This war will be stopped. Yeah, Russia really needs those 20% of the remaining Donetsk territory. That is it all about. That's why Russia is wasting thousands of the forces to get those 20%, which they flatline, ruin, destroy every village, every town. But it's all about those territories. No, it's not about territories. This war is the existential one for both Ukraine and Russia, and it will be finished with one side unable to resist or unable to attack. Only Russia may stop this war, but they are not willing to stop it. Putin wants this war to continue, as we see. He is living in his informational bubble that Russian army is winning. But somehow we see that Putin managed to convince our partners across the ocean that it's better to force Ukraine to capitulate. That it's better to push the weaker part. Yeah, Ukraine is way weaker compared to Russia. And for Trump, I guess it's a mystery of how the country, as he says, 15 or 20 times less than Russia, is capable to resist. And it's also the big question for Donny, why Russia wasn't able to achieve the goals of the special military operation in just a single week. He even called Russia a paper tiger, but nevertheless, he's still flattering with Putin. He still respects those kind of the dictators as Putin. Sadly, guys, but I don't expect anything good for Ukraine for the next few years. 3 years of Donald Trump's presidency. Maybe for Donald Trump after midterm elections it will be harder to ignore the will of Congress, but we see that Donald Trump is willing even to violate internal American laws, and for him, Congress, it would not matter that much. Yeah, it's gonna be harder for him, but he will not be impeached, I think, because simply Senate also should support that, and there is no majority for impeachment in Senate, even if Congress votes for that. I think Congress already impeached Donald Trump twice during his first term, but it didn't help to get rid of Donald Trump's presidency before. And about the security guarantee for Ukraine, that was already partially agreed, as Zelensky says, and could be signed, really, but it doesn't matter. There is no war between America and Ukraine. There is the war between Russia and Ukraine. So it all matters on what Russia might do with it, whether they agree on those kind of the security guarantees for Europeans to deploy their forces to Ukraine. I think Russia will never support that, so Ukraine might sign any sort of the agreements, guarantees with the United States, with Europe, but really it will not matter to stop this war. Only what Putin does matters, unfortunately, guys. Putin started this war and he still has more resources than Ukraine, so he continues this war while he's able to do so. And as we know already from the multiple of the reports, there is the business interest between Russia and the United States of America, and I think Donald Trump personally wants to have good relations with Russia, to put Russia against China later in the future confrontation. But this strategy will fail. It's already understandable because Russia has very close ties with China. Russia is very dependent on China, Russian economy. China replaced lots of the production in Russia, also military production. All of the chips are being delivered mostly via China, also drone components. However, as we know, some of the components and even drone parts, missile parts are coming from our partners from Europe and from the United States of America. Zelensky says about it openly. So the strategy to have some of the friendship with Russia against China, I think is just useless. It will not work absolutely. Also, personal business interests of Withdrawal, they play the great role. Not just Withdrawal, but of Trump's family and Trump's friends. Because Withdrawal himself is a business partner of Donald Trump's family. They have the common structure in crypto business and some of the other Trump's companies. Plus, Withdrawal has personal business relations with Dmitriev, who is now the main negotiator from the Russian side if you speak about economy. The last negotiations in Moscow lasted for at least 4 hours, and they were not speaking just about the peace in Ukraine. They were speaking about business deals. That is the number one priority for the White House administration in resolving the war. And yeah, the Nobel Peace Prize is also one of the main priorities for the White House administration, for Donald Trump to obtain. Not from Maria, Venezuelan oppositioner. He wants his own personal prize, and he was screaming about it towards Norwegian Prime Minister. But Norwegian Prime Minister has nothing to do with this Nobel Prize Committee. It's the separate organization Nevertheless, for Donald Trump, well, he is out of the information, out of clue really of what is happening. He doesn't know the history, he doesn't know politics, and sadly we have to work somehow with him right now, because after all, he's the president of the United States of America, who does so many mistakes that it is just not hilarious, but it's very sad and very bad. It also undermines security of not just Ukraine, but of entire Europe and probably the world. And have you mentioned that Venezuelan topic went off the headlines recently, that Donald Trump just kidnapped Maduro and that's it? Venezuelan regime is still as it was under Hugo Chavez. There is no any change except just Maduro. All of the talks are happening behind the curtains. Donald Trump just negotiated something with oil companies about renewal of the oil production in Venezuela, but not many agreed on that. Several of the tankers, including the tankers of the Russian Shadow Fleet, were captured by United States, but not more than that. Venezuela is still the same, and there is no will of the United States administration to change the regime in Venezuela, and they prefer not even to talk about it. It looks like the idea was just to kidnap Maduro, and they thought that with this Venezuelan regime may start to collapse, but it is not happening. By the way, the same could happen in Russia. Even with Putin's possible death, he's getting older and older. He's still relatively young, even compared to Donald Trump. Yeah, he's 73 years old, I guess, so he may rule 10 years ahead easily. But even if somehow Putin is gone, there is still Putin's circle with the same guys as Putin. Basically ex-KGB agents, current FSB elite, I call it like that. And during the COVID times, Putin really isolated himself from everyone except his close circle. The circle that was thinking very radically towards Ukraine. And they came out with this idea to start a special military operation during the COVID time. It's, like this ChatGPT that always tells that you're right. Whatever you say to the ChatGPT, it will encourage you to do this step you want to do, because the idea is to get engaged with a user and to have this slope of the confirmation. It's basically done for the user satisfaction, and Putin's circle is there for Putin's satisfaction. But the fact that the members of the circle, they're not AI and they really think like that, and the war might continue even with the death of Putin. I think that Putin doesn't play that critical role in the Russian regime as, for example, Russian official opposition tries to tell us. They basically tell that it's just one man Putin, but it's not Putin who goes and signs the contract with the Russian army and goes and unalives Ukrainians in Ukraine. It's the Russian society. It's them sick. They're chauvinists and they're imperialists, as well as their Russian opposition. And this sickness, I guess, only could be cured with Russia itself to disintegrate and to collapse. Because despite their chauvinism, Russians, they're scared and they're divided from within. So it is only possible for this empire to sustain itself under the dictatorship. They always want this strong leader who builds this structure from top to the bottom. And then this leader changes, the system basically stays the same. We already know it from the history of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Then Brezhnev died. Brezhnev, who started this war because of his personal ambitions. Well, he passed away, then there was the other general secretary of the Soviet Union, then the other one and the other, but the war continued because the regime is like that. So this war is started by Putin, but it's not about Putin in general. And it's absolutely not the first time Ukraine is fighting with Russia. As I told you, it was during the Soviet times, it was during the times of the Russian Empire. There was always the confrontation. But this escalation was not just between Ukraine and Russia. Russia confronted many of the countries and entire regions, like, for example, Caucasus. The war in Caucasus lasted for more than 100 years and still lasted in the last century. Chechen War. And if Putin thinks that he was victorious in Chechnya, no. Russia will start to crack, I guess, from that region. It is too different compared to the rest of Russia, and people, they like freedom there. They cannot be conquered easily. And Putin is generally scared about that region. That's why we hear some of the even rumors about Kadyrov. By the way, about Adam Kadyrov, there is no new information published. I think that they just posted some of the old image of Kadyrov, old video on Kadyrov official channel, where Adam Kadyrov was not even wearing a beard. Definitely that's the old video, because for the last few months Adam Kadyrov got the beard and he was publicly spotted elsewhere with a beard, and suddenly they published the video for him several months ago. But they say that it's the current one. Adam Kadyrov allegedly is in hospital in some of the not good condition. The situation with Adam Kadyrov is important not just for Chechnya but for Russia itself. Ramzan Kadyrov wants to appoint his son Adam as successor to rule Chechnya, but Russian FSB elite, they are not agreeing on that. At least it is the information which is spread in some of the opposition media sources. And also in many of the previous occasions, Kadyrov clan showed the lack of loyalty to Vladimir Putin personally. So FSB is looking to appoint someone else, maybe Apti Aludinov, who is the commander of Akhmat battalion. But it's not the topic of this video, this Chechen story. I just wanted to recall what just happened to Adam Kadyrov, because I recorded the video about that one. Well, still there is no 100% proofs that Adam Kadyrov is really in a terrible state, lying in a hospital or something like that. Unfortunately, there is no confirmation. And to conclude this peace deal story, guys, actually there is no big breakthrough happened. There is nothing new, just some of them. Communication, consolidation. Ukraine just, and it's also according to the rumors, Ukraine agreed to withdraw the forces from Donbas, but only if Russia withdraws its forces also from Donbas. But we understand that it will never happen. Russia will never ever agree on that scenario, as well as they will not agree on any sort of the terms, because for now Putin thinks that he is capable to continue this war winning, but they're winning more on paper, painting the territory in a red color, than they do it in real life. Ukraine is very capable for such a small country compared to Russia, for such army with limited support. Ukraine managed to basically stop Russia. Not fully, but Russia bogged down in Ukraine. It is visible now with all of those videos coming from the front lines. Russian regime still doesn't believe in that, but even Russian military bloggers, they are shocked what is happening. And Russia just grinds it down more and more. And with those positive news, let me finish this video. My friends, thank you so much for your kind support on Patreon and also on membership of the channel. You are making my content possible. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for this moving camera. Maybe you don't like it, but that is the reason I'm using this gimbal now, because I saw what happened to Paul Warburg. There's one more Ukrainian update channel. I like what he does, and basically he inspired me to film the videos like that in the nature. But someone created an AI channel that is impersonating Paul, and basically you see Paul, his image, he is speaking with the Paul's voice, so they steal the personality entirely, voice, visuals, everything. But what AI cannot do is to duplicate what is happening, this environment. That's why I'm walking here telling you the story. It's like I have the cameraman. So for AI, it's still hard to do all of this mimics. So you basically see the still picture, still background with all of those AI slop videos, or really the fake content. And sadly, that channel, it also got thousands of the views, and people mainly, they do not understand that it's an AI. And that's the topic I want to film today for my another channel about AI. Yeah, with AI it's really terrible for the content creators. Guys, again, thank you so much for watching my videos. I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.